Ishika Vadhwa, welcome you all to the third edition of Cineas International Film Festival of India, CIFFI 2021. CIFFI 2021 is the world's first 7-day hybrid film festival organized by educational institutes of two countries, DME Media School of Delhi Metropolitan Education, Delhi NCR, India, in association with School of Communication and Creative Arts, Deakin University, Melbourne, Australia. The first edition of CIFFI was held in April 2019 and the second edition was organized in December 2020. It has been a privilege to be associated with Deakin University during the previous editions of our film festival as well. This time, with the theme of cinematic rejuvenation, #Cinema 2021, CIFFI is being organized in a hybrid mode to serve as a beneficial platform for beholding new methods of viewing and studying cinema during the challenging times of the pandemic. It is a matter of pride for us that CIFFI 2021 has received a submission of 3,130 films from a total of 111 countries. This film festival is bringing along 21 sessions with 70 experts through 11 panel discussions, 2 curated sessions, 2 masterclasses, 2 workshops, 2 special sessions, and 2 special segments. Mr. Tigmanshu Dhulia, a national award-winning film director from Bollywood, is the festival ambassador for CIFFI 2021, and we are extremely thankful for his constant support. The festival partners of CIFFI 2021 are Cover Drive Productions, a Noida-based production house, Vigyan Prasad, the organizer of National Science Film Festival of India, International Science Film Festival of India, and India International Science Festival, CMS Vatavaran, Environment and Wildlife Film Festival and Forum, Kids Cinema 2020, an online international children's film festival, Cultural Cinema, a concept-based film festival aimed at celebrating world cultures, We Care Film Festival for promoting and exhibiting films on disability, Delhi International Film Festival for screening films amid heightened deliberations on world cinema. From Australia, our esteemed list of partners includes Asian and Cultural Studies Network, and Australia-India Film Practitioners and Researchers Network. Our institutional partners are Global Media Educational Council, an international platform of media educators and researchers, Indian Documentary Producers Association, and Association of Documentary Filmmakers, Indian Academy of Shorts, an institution for imparting craftsmanship of filmmaking through all small capsules, and New Delhi Film Production. Our media partners are APN News, a fast-paced current affairs web channel, Hindi Gaurav, one of the oldest Hindi newspapers in Australia, and the Policy Times, an international platform for unfolding policy and governance issues. I would like to inform that CIFFI 2021 is powered by SPARK, the Student Council of DME Media School. Journalism at DME is the official newsletter of DME Media School. This fortnightly publication covers all major activities happening in and out the campus. It is a student-centric newsletter carried out entirely by them under the supervision of the faculty members. DME TV is the official YouTube channel of DME, where you can find the playlist related to all sessions, lecture series, film festivals, and conference. It gives me immense pleasure to announce that for various sessions, we will go live on our official Facebook page of DME. For more information, follow us on our social media handles. Links are given below in the chat box. Today, we will be screening 36 films from the fiction and documentary categories. You can watch them on our website, ciffi.dme.ac.in. Now, I request Professor Dr. Amrish Saxena, Festival Director and Dean DME Media School, to kindly give the opening remarks.
So thank you everybody for joining in this session. And since we are already late in starting this session, so I believe we should go ahead with this session, and I will request Dr. Manasvi to take it forward.
I am Dr. Manasvi, Associate Professor, DME Media School. And I'm really happy to introduce all the panelists to you. Welcome to the third day, all of you, to the CIFFI 2021. This is the third day, and first panel discussion is on the theme covering Indian cinema in Australian Indian media. We have an esteemed group of experts here to talk about the subject. So our first guest is Professor Phillip Mclntyre. He's an Australian communication and media scholar who researches at creativity and creative industries using a systems-based approach. His most recent ARC linkage project was a nationwide venture identifying and explaining regional creative hotspots. Professor Mclntyre has published a number of books on creative systems across all creative industries, including chapters on film, and he is the group leader of the Future Work Research Group in the FAST Lab Research Center at the University of Newcastle. His keynote to the 2016 Espera Sightlines conference was entitled Rethinking Filmmaking as Research, Applying the Scholarly Research into Creativity. I welcome you, sir. The next guest today is Susan Kerringgen, Associate Professor, Creative Practice Qualitative Researcher with the University of Newcastle. She has been Chief Investigator.
Anjali Bhushan, as a director, writer, and producer, Anjali focuses on bringing to screen stories that inspire and provide hope. She makes content that rekindles and reactivates affirmative life values. She draws the best out of the world around her, exposing and bringing to light the beauty that lies hidden in the depths of human failings. She has co-produced and directed 3 documentaries with British, Polish, and Japanese co-producers. Anjali has co-produced and co-directed a documentary tentatively titled The Bandra Project, co-produced and co-directed by Leslie Woodwin, a controversial features-length documentary based on Nirbhaya rape case 2012, titled India's Daughter. Directed and produced the documentary My Home India, directed and produced the documentary Smiling Woman of Banda.
As we look critically at our own cultural assumptions about how creativity works, this whole session aims to discover at the level of cross-cultural creativity a common way to understand and therefore act upon creativity. The research asks, does the systems approach to creativity already applied extensively in the West also have a more universal application? In discovering an answer to this question, the intention is to move beyond the cultural model of one culture at one historical point of time and develop a common awareness of this vital phenomena. Only with this understanding can we improve the creativity of people, groups, organizations, and societies. The pilot work investigating these ideas at the cross-cultural level has been conducted into the film industry in India and Australia by Vikrant, Kishore, by Kerrigan, and by Professor Mclntyre, Davis, and Kishore under the systems approach. Now, this has laid the groundwork for a much more in-depth study of creative activity within and between Australia and India. So we would like to touch upon these points and explore further as to what exactly is meant by cross-cultural creativity and when there are some common threads with regard to creativity, and particularly also in the light of the fact that Australia is developing as a multi-cultural society. Unlike India, in India also within the framework, within the boundary of the country, there are different kind of cultures, but then there is one common culture, obviously, which we can say is prevalent in India. Unlike Australia, where there are people of different nationalities, different races, they live together. So they have their different approaches towards creativity. So what exactly is the cross-cultural creativity? So to begin with, I will request Professor Phillip, who is in the School of Creative Industry, University of Newcastle, and who has worked basically in this area, cross-cultural creativity. And since he is deep into this research on this subject and has also an overview as far as the literature in this regard is concerned, so I will request you to please throw light on cross-cultural creativity, keeping in view the research that he has done, keeping in view the literature which is available in this particular area. Professor Phillip.
Okay, just for my own sake, I'm just going to push this out of the code. And the audio is still working there, Vikrant?
All good.
Great, thank you. The topic of my presentation, I'm going to try and keep this as quick as I can. It's a really large area, and I'm going to keep it down to 5 minutes. So get ready for a fairly whirlwind tour of cross-cultural creativity. And that should bring us then to Susan Kerrigan's work on the systems model. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the literature, and Ambrish has touched on this just a little bit in the introduction. There was a book that came out in 2006 called the International Handbook of Creativity, which was put together by David Kaufman and Robert Sternberg, who are rather large in the area of creativity research, both psychologists. What they were aiming to do was to take a tour around the world and see across each continent what is the perception in that area of the understanding of creativity, and then how it could be applied, but also whether there was a common thread in our way of thinking about, let me just expand the word creativity into bringing novel things into being that are valued in at least one social setting. So when I use the word creativity, that's what I'm meaning. Bringing novel things into being that are valued in at least one social setting. And the research literature in the area has more or less come to that particular point of view in terms of understanding creativity as well. And Ambrish pointed to this as well, that a country's culture exerts a profound effect on the creative expression of that particular country. You can see it in the films, you can see it in the songs, and so on. And further on, in that handbook of creativity, there was, of course, a view on the Indian experience. And Misra, Srivastava and Misra, forgive my pronunciations, I'm ignorant in many ways, said, and I will go on to say that creativity is rooted in the surroundings. And from an Indian point of view, and we're generalizing here, of course, across the Indian subcontinent, that every artist is deeply concerned with how to interact with his or her environment, whether it's natural environment, whether it's a cultural environment, or the socio-political environment. And that's a slightly different view at the everyday level to what occurs in the West, particularly in the United States, a very individual-focused culture. So in other words, things emanate from the individual rather than from the culture itself, or from the interactions of individuals with the culture. So there's a slightly different view. In East Asia, it's a slightly different thing again. New and Sternberg did a study into Chinese creativity, Japanese creativity, and so on. And the interesting thing for me is that both Misra et al. And New and Sternberg point to one particular person who has from the West, who has a common understanding of both East Asian and South Asian notions of bringing novel things into being. And that's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a Hungarian, an American Hungarian scholar. And this is very similar in many ways to his ideas. So Misra et al. Said that the generalized mindset for an Indian is that a human and the environment share a symbiotic relationship in which the human is not the conqueror of the environment, but is one among all living matter. And in many ways, that's very close to Csikszentmihalyi's systems understanding of what's going on in terms of creativity. Now, in terms of the research literature and the trajectory of that research literature, according to Dean Keith Simonton, we are heading, in terms of the researchers and the scholars looking at creativity, that's their focus, research into creativity across the globe appears to be heading in the same direction. And it's towards this systems view of life. And in many ways, as is the case in many things for the Indian subcontinent, you guys are just way ahead of us. In terms of your understanding of how humans relate to the environment and so on. So you're much closer to where this research is going to than, for instance, what's occurring in the United States. Beth Hennessy and Teresa Amabile, both of whom are giants in this particular area, they did a review of the in the annual review of psychology focused at creativity in 2010. And they looked at creativity from a neuroscientific point of view. They looked at it from a cognitive psychology point of view. They looked at personalities. They looked at groups and how groups interact. And of course, that's very pertinent to filmmaking. They looked at the social environment and of course, the culture and society and the systems approach. And the conclusion they came to after their meta-analysis of all of this research literature, and it was really thorough, they said that a deeper understanding requires more interdisciplinary research, so between, say, for instance, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, and so on, based on a systems view of creativity that recognizes a variety of interrelated forces operating at multiple levels. And then again, in 2017, Beth Hennessy updated that meta-analysis, and to her surprise, in many ways, in that 7 years, more and more researchers were starting to explore creativity and innovation through a systems-based approach. She said a growing number of publications are now reflecting the systems perspective. Only with the adoption of a truly integrated systems perspective can researchers hope to ever understand the complexities of the creative process, how we as filmmakers go about doing what we do on a everyday basis and the connections to the context that we actually exist in. And she said, we're not there yet. Not everybody has got to this point, but we are at least moving in the right direction. So that's the journey across the literature. One of my colleagues, Susan Kerrigan, has come up with this particular reconceptualization of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's systems model. And that's gained in credence around the world in terms of its application to areas of creativity. We dealt with this in our edited book on creative systems in action, with a number of studies from around the world on this particular model. And Susan will explain this more fully in a second. One of the things that has come out recently from a book called A Research Agenda for Creative Industries by Stuart Cunningham and Terry Flew, both of whom Susan and I have had the pleasure of working with on Australian Research Council studies. One of those chapters in that book was from Roberta Communion, and she said there are insufficient connections made between the impact of microdynamics, such as the practice of an artist or even the content of his or her artwork, so the people who are actually on the ground making films, and the role of the meso level, what she calls the operation of cultural and creative industries in cities and regions. And I take that to mean institutions and organizations, say, for instance, film studios in Mumbai and so on, or macro level dynamics, such as the growth of certain market outputs at the national and international level. And that includes things like the political realm, international trade regimes, intellectual property laws that run across borders and so on. So it's a scaled approach. And she says that in order to understand this fully, we need to map the different levels of understandings and findings within a complexity perspective. Now, read complexity perspective to mean a systems approach, because complexity is one major characteristic of systems. We need to have a look at this from idea generation. And I see that there are writers on this panel, there are directors on this panel, producers on this panel, etc., through to global market outputs, which some people on this panel will have their head around as well. So if you just map this idea out itself, you could say, well, the macro scale, we need to have a look at the role and impact of what's happening at government, what's happening between countries and so on. At the meso scale, let's have a look at what studios are doing. Let's have a look at what's happening at an institutional level inside the studios in order to affect the creative output. And at the micro scale, let's have a look at what directors are doing, at what cinematographers are doing, at what filmmakers are doing, etc., as they go about their daily business. And of course, that can be operationalized through a particular set of multiple mixed methods. The macro scale, I would suggest it's a highly quantitative approach. We need a lot of statistics about what's going on, and you can see some of the sources of it there. At the meso scale, an ethnographic study of what's happening inside studio systems, say for instance in Mumbai, will tell us a lot about the environment that particular creative artists work in. And of course, if you take a practice-based approach using a practitioner-based inquiry or anything that's actually on the ground, if you actually make the thing, let's find out what it is that you do when you make the thing. So I think there's a lot of work for filmmakers to engage in, both as practitioners and as researchers. And I've probably gone over my 5 minutes with all of that. We might just pass Ambrish across to Susan now, who'll pick up on that particular model. So I'll just stop sharing. And we can pick up this conversation again in the discussion, I imagine.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Phillip, for explaining this whole systems model of creativity and the systems approach. So to continue with whatever you explained us with regard to creativity, I will make a request to Professor Susan Kerrigan, who has been a television producer and director and who is in the University of Newcastle, to explain further this whole reconceptualized systems model of creativity and how it has applied, and particularly talking about this whole application in the context of Australia. Professor Susan.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for that lead in, Phil. I'm also just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see there a picture of the systems model. And this is actually it's a change to the systems model. There are 3 components to Csikszentmihalyi systems model. So Philip talked about creativity being how novel things are brought into being and how those novel things are valued in one social setting. So that idea, that thinking comes from a theoretical approach called the creative system. And a Danish professor, Eva Redvold, she has looked into how creativity works in Denmark. And she was looking at the screenwriting processes, the screenwriting noir there, and she's broken down the system into some other underlying components. So the 3 main components are domain, individuals, and then field. So in the domain, there's taste, trends, and traditions. For individuals, there's talent, training, and track record. And then for field, there's mandate, money, management, and money. Now, the system integrates these components that they all work together to produce novelty. So that's one way of looking at the creative system. That is a very generic overview of it. I'm just going to unshare that, and I'm going to share the model that I created, which was as a filmmaker. I took those, the 3 models, the culture, the domain, the agent, the personal background, and the field, society. And as a filmmaker, I wanted to understand a bit better how my filmmaking, my practice, actually incorporated, how those components were incorporated into my practice. And so while the theory can be a little complex, it's actually a very small step from being a practitioner to understanding the theory if you can reconceptualize your practice through this thinking. So let me break down what I mean by culture and domain first. So the domain, of course, is going to be, I think of it as an archive or a library where a whole lot of codes and conventions of the culture reside. So in that sense, for films, we are talking about genres, be they fiction or non-fiction. We're talking about aesthetics. We're talking about platforms. We're talking about global, national, or local forms of filmmaking. We're also going to be talking about production knowledges. We're going to be talking about technologies as well that reside inside the domain. So all of the codes and conventions that lead us to being filmmakers is knowledge that exists in a domain, and we can have access to it as filmmakers. Also, cultural knowledge sits there. So the knowledge of Australian filmmaking is going to sit there, which is going to be different to the knowledge of Indian filmmaking, because the films made in India are quite different to the films made in Australia, but they both have representing our cultural voices of our own countries. So that's the domain, a cultural archive. Then there is, I'm going to move to field and society next. So field and society is where the gatekeepers sit. Gatekeeper could be a term that you might all be well aware of, but these are people who make decisions about what's permittable to be commissioned or to be made. People that are gatekeepers for, say, a filmmaker like me, I was a director, so people who are empowering me to make films would be an executive producer, a funding body, a distributor. Those kinds of people, they sit in that area of field and society, and they are the people that are constantly critiquing and judging work to make sure that that work is acceptable to the taste and trends and traditions of what is existing inside the domain. Then between those two things, the culture and the society, or the domain and the field, we then move across to the agent. So the agent is the individual person, which is me, as a filmmaker, and how might I go about understanding the taste, trends, and traditions? How might I go about understanding the mandate, the management, and the money in order to make a film? Well, I do that through learning, through becoming a filmmaker, through trying to create films that I serve up and see if those films will be selected as being representative of a novel viewing or approach to the story I want to tell. So in that sense, my personal background is important, my talent, my training, and my track record. And you all well know, particularly the esteemed panel members here who've got amazing CVs and done some really impressive filmmaking, you all know that your last film is a calling card for your next film. So it is your track record that moves you through the system and up into the upper echelons of the system. The thing that I did with this model in terms of the theory is I took it from looking at creativity from standing outside to looking at creativity from feeling what it feels like to be inside as a filmmaker, to actually experience creative practice. So I essentially said, to understand how to be a creative filmmaker, so making novel products that are accepted and valued by other peers, okay, that I have to have a very good understanding not only of approaches to filmmaking, my own training and track record, and my own aesthetic skills and understanding and storytelling techniques. I also have to understand what the gatekeepers want from me, and I also have to understand what new ideas can be pitched into the domain so that they will be acceptable. So Csikszentmihalyi says that we need to internalize the three components of the creative system in order to be creative. And that's what my research was looking at. How do I internalize those components in order to actually be creative, to be working at the very cutting edge of filmmaking? And that's all the theory is. It's quite a simple theory. It's not complex, but it is sitting inside a system of work. I've also looked at creative process, so stages of creative process and creative collaboration theories, which we haven't got time to talk about today. But that just gives a simple overview and background into how one individual can carry quite a lot of codes and conventions and understanding of the opinions of their peers in order to create or make creative work that's acceptable and that will be considered novel.
Thank you, Professor Susan. Professor Susan explained the model that she has explained, that she has made on this reconceptualized creativity. And it was interesting to note the relationship that she tried to establish between the domain, field, and the agent. And she also explained that connection and the importance of the personal background of the filmmaker and the society. So moving on, I will request Ms. Anjali Bhushan, who is a director, writer, and producer, and working with the Viacom 18 studios at the head of creativity, content, and production. Now, since she is working in India, handling the production, she herself is a creative person, and now she is handling the creative content for Viacom. And we have been listening to these academic people, so it was completely an academic perspective, whatever Professor Phillip and Professor Suzanne said on this. But then let us look into as to what exactly is the harmony between the academic part and the practice part. So, Ms. Anjali, since you have been a practitioner, and so can you tell us whatever you have heard till now, if you can establish a link between the academic and the creativity, the way you handle it, and then also if you can underline the difference as to what exactly these things can be perceived and can be explained in Australia as different from India. Ms. Anjali.
Hi, so nice to meet you all. I've been an academician before, so I kind of get it. This is all textbook. And it's interesting because it's also important to be able to analyze history as it happens. as it occurs, pretty much that is what analysis leads us to. But it's a very critical arm and needs to be done. But practically, when I'm sitting down and making films, at the end of the day, if you're looking at audience research, if you're looking at how an audience will take your material, then we're in a very progressive, positive space today, far more than we ever were in India, for example, because we've had an onset of OTTs coming in, and today the creative language of people understanding content has become pretty equal, from a Hollywood film to a Indian film to an Australian film to a European film or a Japanese film. Today, people are accepting content and understanding the film language a lot better in larger numbers because they have access to this other kind of content. So it's shaping and changing the way a human being receives that content also. However, the challenge from a maker's perspective stays, because if I have to make a film, for example, like this is a constant debate that I have. My interest is in making Indian content for the rest of the world. Quite clearly in my career, I've been doing that. But to do that, one also has to be successful in one's own country. So that has been part of the fight. So what one understands is that if I have to make a film which has to be accepted across nations, across cultures and identities, then I must understand and come to a common language. So first is a literal language, which is your English, Hindi, which languages are we taking, what accents are we coming to? So if I'm clear that I'm making this film only for an Australian release, that would be different. But mostly our maths and dynamics for storytelling don't really allow that. So you need to make something which is more like a pan-cultural encounter for an audience, So how do you achieve that? What is that pan-cultural encounter? One must obviously have that kind of exposure as a creative mind to understand that, okay, I want to tell my story about a little village in Kashmir, but it should be understood by a small little ranch somewhere in Australia and also in US and also in Italy. So how do you do that common thread? I think there is no maths to this. One just feels one's way through storytelling. The other thing, so the film language, which is the shots that we take, whether it needs to be a long shot or a close-up or an extreme close-up, or is the feeling coming across in the scene descriptions, that is one way of looking at it. The other is the physical language. Today, that has become a less challenge, I would say, because people are accepting of content across the globe in different languages, which is why a film on an OTT, which is in Spanish, is consumed heavily in India as well, which is consumed heavily in Italy as well, and which also gets an Oscar later, So these are truths that have happened, and it's really refreshing to see that as a professional, because that makes you feel like you can talk. Today, more and more local becomes global. So if I give you a niche story and take you into a world which is very different from what the audience particularly lives in, then they are going to take more interest in that story, because it gives them an insight which they wouldn't get otherwise. If they travel to that part and physically spent a few months, years there, or worked there, then they would get that insight. Otherwise, they can get that from a film. So more and more audience is accepting of content like that, and therefore filmmakers are empowered to make content like that. Now, where are the challenges? The challenges are still there, and we face them every day in production, because where is the money coming from? How are the returns on investment coming? Will then reverse manufacture itself to where we should shoot the film. Are we getting rebates there? Are the countries aligned? Are there double taxation treaties between us? So India and Australia having double taxation treaty is still the most underutilized double taxation treaty. The British double taxation treaty is the only one we've probably used a lot from a producer's perspective. But there are two different ways of looking at it. One is the director's perspective, where is my story based? Where can I make it look best? So sometimes I might want to shoot in London, but I may not be able to afford it, and I shoot it in Bulgaria and Noida studios instead. That also happens. Or that a Game of Thrones is shot in a make-believe world, so they will shoot across the globe and choose those places accordingly. Or somebody will shoot in Australia, or somebody will shoot in New Zealand. So we were trying to do a cricket film, and we were trying to find out if Australia can give us good ESOPs, but we didn't get them because there The rules, there haven't been any productions since many, many years. So the rules were not refreshed. So today a UK can give me a 40% or a 30% over and above everything, even on an ATL, an above the line budget and a below the line budget, while other countries are only giving me a VAT or refund, or they're giving me a 25%. So I land up picking up where I'm going to place my story accordingly. And that also gets really important in the making, because the moment you're showing the culture of a particular place, that place will then become a travel hub and travel much more. If the government's understood that a little more, we will have a easier path as filmmakers to be able, as storytellers. Now, this may be true of fiction, what I'm talking about, but on documentary, it's completely different. I've gone and picked up a camera and borrowed another camera in England and shot interviews and my footage. I've done the same in Poland. I've done the same in India, in different parts of India, and it's been fine. It's self-funded. We've even been able to get a film out in like as little as 10,000 euro grant, because I funded the rest of it, but then it's an IP I'm generating. So it's a research from scratch about Polish people in India in the 1940s. And that was, white refugees in India. So that's a documentary that I made because somebody needs to know that. Nobody knows that there were white refugees on brown soil. And it's never happened before or after. So it's a very important story, and it's also a historic development which went unnoticed. So I landed up doing that myself over the years. What I'm trying to say is I managed to get a $10,000 grant, euro grant from the Polish government. But there are no rules for co-production like that. I've always had, I have suffered on the hands of that as a filmmaker. Because when I'm doing a UK-Danish co-production with India, my rights are not there because I've got a British jurisdiction signed. So who's going to afford that kind of legality? So their co-production laws don't exist between countries. While there are treaties, but there are no legal systems which will help and aid in a filmmaker's, desperation. When two filmmakers fight, I had a fight with my producer, Leslie Woodwin, and me had a fight. And because of the way she was showing and pitching this film, and she wasn't allowing me to do my own edit, and then took me off the film even, but who is she to take me off? It was my film. I invited her. So, she managed to steal the footage out. And it was a nightmare, because who am I going to convince? There is no court that I can go to. So because I've signed British jurisdiction, thinking that sales will happen there more, because documentary sales don't happen in India. So one tends to suffer as a filmmaker. So if you're talking about language of cinema, I think language of cinema is global. People get it. Emotions are global. Everybody goes through the same emotions. It's not nationality or culture bound. Yes, we have to be a little more sensitive in the making, which is a big challenge as well, because whether you are representing LGBTQ communities or you're representing a certain culture, it gets typecasted and people think that everybody from that culture looks like that and behaves like that, which is the unfair space. But a lot of times people go through that because the filmmakers don't have exposure. They haven't actually traveled there or done their research and land up making these silly mistakes. So, agreeing to the mass cultural, what I would say, paradigm, which, it needs to shift. That is why we make films. We can shift paradigms so easily in film. So yeah, these are some of the experience I could share with.
Thank you, Anjali Bhushan. So it was nice to have your own perspective, which are really interesting. The most interesting point that you said, that the sensitivity level remains the same. So that way there is definitely the same level of creativity, or there's a universal concept of creativity that exists wherever a filmmaker is making a film. And then also you raised the difference between fiction and documentary. And particularly talking about fiction, you talked about as to how the filmmakers can be facilitated to shoot in another country if that country has that kind of legal and other necessary frameworks. As you said, that between India and Australia, this double taxation treaty is there, but still that is not being explored the way it should be. And then beyond that, on the ground, how the application of whatever rules have been made, that is seen. So that's definitely important for somebody who is making a film. So moving on from a filmmaker to a filmmaker, and from a woman filmmaker to a woman filmmaker. So reaching out to Dr. Gauri Chakraborty, who started her career as a professional, as a filmmaker, and then now into teaching, but then her forte is films, and she is teaching films, she is making films. So and then she is also a combination of the academic and the practice. So we will be able to understand this this particular aspect. Also, if I can tell you, then she is also into arts and traditional arts. She herself is a dancer. So given all this background, if I ask you, Dr. Gauri, that how do you define your creativity as a filmmaker, and how you gel with this creativity with the academic work that you do?
Thank you so much, sir, and I hope I'm audible. This is a fascinating discussion, and really glad to hear the views of Professor Phillip, Professor Kerrigan, and Anjali. And I must share with the house that I like those circles that I could see, the diagram. I can imagine myself standing right in the center of it, because I am a second generation classical dancer, which means I got the sanskar, and I hope the word sanskar is clear in terms of English. It is, I think, imbibed knowledge. It came to me through the womb. I then went on to become a dancer myself, moved on into active filmmaking, and finally landed up on the altars of education. So it's been an intersection of thought, of learning. And Professor Mclntyre, when you said, in your presentation, there was this concept of looking at Indian art as a representation of a group. And I would echo the same words. I've had the privilege of interacting with Professor Binoy Behel, who does extensive research on arts in the Ajanta and Ellora caves. And I was pretty bemused the first time he told me that some of the murals in those caves are not, individual instances, that they don't have signatures of the painters, which is such an, a concept of the Western world. These were art pieces created by the community. And to add to this, they resound with the core of Indic philosophy and art, which is to look at the self and its relationship with nature and the universe. And that itself forms the basis of Indian art, though at times this does get dissolved, diluted in our daily interaction. I must also share with you that I have learned my art by not paying a single rupee to my guru, not even a single rupee. It is called the Guru Shishya Parampara, in which I would go after college to my guru's house, and whatever chores were required were part of the deal, and it came voluntarily. The knowledge also was shared voluntarily. And it is a relationship of a learner with a guardian, which means that you have a third person along with your parents who's leading you to understanding art. Now, add to this the spontaneity of the artist, that there is no fixed curricula. For most of my life, I have debated this learning because I have no certificate to show. I have, no curricula to explain on one particular day, and Dr. Kishore will be, agreeing with this at all moments. On one particular day, the guru decides to teach you singing. The next day you go, he's in the mood of teaching you footwork. On another day, he says, today I will just do the rasa theory. I will, bhav paksh. I will do the face, the use of the face in expression. Along with that, there is constant reference in this interaction of the traditional arts, the folk arts, because the way I look at creativity, the Indian folk arts resound with innovation. And, in my interaction or in my employment with the BBC World Service Trust, where we were looking at HIV awareness all across India, we were going to villages where people thought HIV was, happened because of a mosquito. And there, how do you tell, this person? And this is a format which was very reflexive. So on one hand, there is the camera, which is capturing this. And on the other hand, we are obligated to, to convey the correct message. And that's where the traditional art forms and their creativity, the semi-rigid, the fluid form of traditional arts in India came in really handy. So every specific geographical location that you move to, you built in the message within their form. And how creative can that be? Having said that, I must share with you that the modern education system, the students that I get, I'm going to go to Professor Kerrigan's point of view, the gatekeeper and the agent. I find myself both the gatekeeper and the agent in this training, because if the trainer does not have respect for traditional arts and the messages that it carries, and this is so resounding and has resonance with Australia, where there's indigenous cultures. I happened to meet a scholar who was working on the haka, and immediately it was as if my individual corresponded with who she was. So it's important that the agent who trains, and at the end of the day, these art forms, this creativity, whether it was in the form of a painting or something spoken, was meant to communicate. And that's where the specificity, the diversity, if it is not known by the trainer, the agent, it becomes difficult. I'll just give you an example, and I'll add 2-3 elements to my presentation. One is, I'll just speak something, and I'm sure Vikrant will understand, and Sir, who's from the playwright background, will understand. When I was young, this meant a full stop to me, and this is it. Ta thaya 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 thay, ta thaya 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 ho. I still say this to my students. It is the form of bhavai. Bhavai is a folk art form. It's also part of how we look at swang, traditional performance art. And when I was growing up in another land from where I belonged. And to me, this meant, sometimes my mother would use it to say, come on, now let's do a full stop. But when I say this in class, students are extremely surprised. Some of them belonging to the same land, in fact. This is something that is bothersome. And I think it can really initiate a new trend of thinking if we were also reflexive in our identities. I'll not like to take more time, but also show you a particular innovative exercise that I did to solve one of the major agendas. And I'm so sorry for being so sparse and kind of pointed in my conversation, but I want to use time well. There is a particular instrument that I created. Sorry, I'll need sharing rights, sir.
The technical team, can you provide the sharing right to Dr. Gauri?
Gauri, you should already have that. Just look at the bottom where the stop video.
Yes, so I say share.
Yeah, just share screen.
And I'll do share screen.
Ma'am, I'll just be sharing the screen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Modita. So grateful. So this is for the house. And if I can go to my first slide. Now, this is where all this that I'm talking about translates into action. My focus and humble submission to trainers across the world has been, let us also get research to intersect with the tangible. Let people experience why we say a certain thing. So if you notice, this is a pedagogical tool created by me and my students specifically for an event. This is a life-size bioscope. But the distinguishing factor is that if you look at the motifs And in traditional arts, in creativity of the people, the motif becomes very important. The motifs have been reoriented, recreated, and all this is, these are all materials that nobody would think will help in creating a bioscope. These are actually channis, and again, Vikrant and Amrish sir will be able to associate. They are used to, विक्रांत क्या कहेंगे अनाज को साइफ को करना?
Storage.
Sieve. It's a sieve.
Okay.
It's a sieve used by villagers. It's a 15 rupee sieve. This the little thing that you see here. So things like elements like that, simple plain colors have been used. And what was I doing? What was the agenda? The agenda was to bring this creativity to talk about gender. And so when the young people came, they were amused. They didn't know. They used to see screens. Suddenly, there's something that they're seeing which is unique. When the older people came to this installation, they were nostalgic. Some of them with warmth and moist eyes, because this reminded them of their their younger period. And what were they seeing inside? It was a personal experience, and they were seeing films on agency and consent. Now, this is what I would say creativity, which involves a person who knows how do I justify who I am as a trainer if I don't bring it on ground, if I don't excite people to look at the issues at hand. So again, I repeat, this is called the indie gaze. This is how people were looking through this gadget. There are screens in those two circles that one sees. There's a table inside which has two computer screens, a mouse is outside, and the entrapment itself attracts the viewer, the person passing through the installation, and they are seeing absolute narratives which defy, which counter, which rupture the social norms. So these are girls from let's say lesser empowered space called Khadar. They are doing a rap song. There's so much intersectionality. There's so much to discover within this text of the viewing. And then these are formal videos made by UN Women in India about consent. So we had a range of these videos, and people would come in and they would see this. And the last thing, and I want to close on this, let it be a musical closing. I ensure that my students understand India, because the creativity of India is also in its people. It's also in the groups that have identities. So this is just a 1-minute piece made by my students with their gadgets, and it also has masking. So, the next level of using effects. So please have a look. I hope the sound will be clear. And then I'll close the case for today.
Thank you, Gauri, for making this whole session so musical and so charming and interesting. Dr. Gauri touched upon a completely different kind of aspect, taking us to the roots of the tradition and linking this tradition to culture. Which is very much true to all indigenous community, right from India to Australia. And this applies to all kind of art forms, whether we are talking about the performing arts or the fine arts. So this very close connection between the art forms, the tradition, and the culture, which is very, very common to all kinds of societies and which is beyond nationalities. So thank you, Gauri, for touching upon this a completely different dimension. Now, moving on, I will request Dr. Harvinder Mankkar, who is a director, writer, producer, and who has also been a journalist, writing extensively, and who has also handling the responsibility of editing Mayapuri, which is a very popular magazine in India. Given all this perspective, all this background that Dr. Mankkar you have, so what will you say, and what a new dimension, new level you will try to take this whole debate on this cross cultural creativity? Dr. Mankkar.
नमस्कार. सरजमीन हिंद से सभी को मेरा बहुत बहुत प्रणाम.
जी नमस्कार.
जहाँ तक मुझे लगता है, मैंने सबको सुना, सुसन जी को सुना, फिलिप सर सुना, अंजलि, गौरी, आप सब. जिस तरह मेरा ये मानना है दोस्तों कि जिस तरह सूरज की किरणों का, किसी फूल की खुशबू का या हवा का कोई मजहब नहीं होता, कोई सरहद नहीं होती, उसी तरह कल्चर का, आपकी क्रिएटिविटी का, आपकी आर्ट का, आपकी फिल्मों का, आपके सिनेमा का कोई सरहद या कोई दायरा या कोई लैंग्वेज उसको नहीं बांध सकते आप. हिंदुस्तान की अगर बात करें तो ये मिट्टी जो है, ये कल्चर और हमारे पुराने इतिहास से जुड़ी हुई है. और अगर हम ऑस्ट्रेलिया की बात करते हैं कि अगर जैसे मैंने जितना ऑस्ट्रेलिया देखा है या जितना मैं वहाँ रहा हूँ, एक खूबसूरती एक अलग चीज है कि एक कंट्री साफ सुथरी कितनी है या वो खूबसूरत कितनी है. जरूरत ये है कि उनकी सोच कितनी बढ़िया है और उनकी सोच कितनी क्रिएटिव है. सिनेमा की बात करें तो ऑस्ट्रेलिया की जो, अगर हमें आपस में हिंदुस्तान की और ऑस्ट्रेलिया की अगर हमें एकजुटता बनानी है या हमें ये समझना है कि हम दोनों मिलकर कैसे काम कर सकते हैं, ये जो विक्रांत जी का ये इतना उपराला भी है और आप सब जो कर रहे हैं उनकी इतनी मेहनत है. जितना मैं विक्रांत किशोर को जानता हूं, उन्होंने बहुत मेहनत की है इस पे कि 7 समुंदर पार अगर आप एक देश में बैठे हैं और आप ये सोच रहे हैं कि क्यों नहीं मैं अपने उस कल्चर और इस कल्चर को मिक्स करूं और दोनों की अपॉर्चुनिटी इतनी खूबसूरत लेके आऊं कि ये मालूम पड़े कि हाँ, कि बेशक हमारी भाषा अलग हो सकती है, बेशक हमारा रंग रूप अलग हो सकता है, लेकिन हमारी सोच, हमारी सोल और हमारी सिनेमा बनाने की जो हमारी परंपरा है, जिसको सिनेमा कहा जाता है, कमर्शियल नहीं है. आप टेक्निकल स्ट्रांग कोई कंट्री हो सकती है, कोई हॉलीवुड हो सकता है, ग्राफिकली हो सकता है, लेकिन जब हम उसकी बेसिक सिनेमा की बात करते हैं दोस्तों, तो हम बात करते हैं कि असल में जमीन क्या है, कंक्रीट पे कहाँ है. और अगर हम हिंदुस्तान की बात करते हैं, इंडिया की बात करते हैं, तो हम जुड़े, हमारी वही कहानियां सबसे ज्यादा सफल भी हुई हैं आज तक जो जमीन से जुड़ी हुई हैं, जो मुंशी प्रेमचंद का लिटरेचर कह सकते हैं, या जो वो कहानियां जो आज का दौर है, जैसे ओटीटी का दौर है, तो आज सबसे बेस्ट दौर है कि कंटेंट बेस्ड सिनेमा हुआ है. बहुत मुश्किलों से वो यहाँ पहुंचा है कि आप कुछ कहानी कहते हैं, वरना पहले हम फार्मूला कह रहे थे कि एक फिल्म है, एक हीरो है, एक विलन है, एक कॉमेडियन है, दैट्स विशुम 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 एंड स्टोरी स्टार्ट टू फिनिश एंड थोड़ा लव एंगल है, दैट्स टू खत्म. लेकिन अब कहानियां आती हैं, अब पीकू आती है, अब पिंक आती है, अब इस तरह की कहानियां सामने आनी शुरू हुई हैं कि जिसमें दोनों देश, चाहे वो ऑस्ट्रेलिया की अगर मैं बात करूं तो हमें उसके लिए सबसे जरूरी है कि ऑस्ट्रेलिया के अंदर उसका वो लिटरेचर ढूंढना होगा, वो जड़ ढूंढनी होगी कि वो लोग जो ऑस्ट्रेलियन कल्चर को जानते हैं, जो उसके इतिहास को जानते हैं, जो बेसिक वहाँ की कहानियां हैं, क्योंकि अंजलि ने बहुत बढ़िया कहा था कि अगर हम सिर्फ शूट के लिए जाते हैं तो हम लंदन चले जाएं, अमेरिका चले जाएं, उससे नहीं फर्क पड़ता। वो एक ट्रैवलिंग है, वो एक खूबसूरत सीनरी है, वो हम कैप्चर कर लेते हैं कहीं। लेकिन अगर हम ऑस्ट्रेलिया की, जहाँ तक मैं बात करता हूँ, अगर सिडनी की बात करूँ या मेलबोर्न या पर्थ की बात करूँ, तो आमिर खान का एक गाना सिडनी में शूट हुआ भी था, मेरा ख्याल है, मुझे जहाँ तक मैं सही हूँ अगर, तो तन्हाई आई होप सो। तो मैं वो गया था उस जगह देखने, वो कब्रिस्तान बहुत खूबसूरत एक समुद्र के किनारे बना हुआ है सिडनी में। तो चीजें देखो, वो खोज अगर हमारे हिंदुस्तानियों को करनी है, ऑस्ट्रेलिया में जाकर शूट करना है या उनसे कोलैबोरेशन करना है, ये दो अलग चीजें हैं। एक, मुझे ऑस्ट्रेलिया में जाके शूट करना है और मुझे वहाँ क्या हेल्प मिलती है, मुझे वहाँ क्या सहायता मिलती है, अगर मुझे कोई सब्सिडी मिलती है, नॉर्मली बजटिंग के दृष्टि से यही देखा जाता है। लेकिन अगर मुझे कल्चर से जुड़ना है, फिर मेरे लिए ये कोई चीजें मायने नहीं रखती। फिर मैं चाहूंगा कि उनकी जो अच्छाइयां हैं, उनके सभ्यता का जो सबसे खूबसूरत हिस्सा है, वो मैं अपनी फिल्मों के अंदर करैक्टर के रूप में ले आऊं। मेरी कहानी का कोई एक करैक्टर ऐसा होना चाहिए जो सूसन जैसा दिखता हो, सूसन जैसा सोचता हो, जो फिलिप जैसे बात करता हो, जो उन लोगों जैसा हो, जो अमरीश जी जैसा समझ रहा हो दोनों भाषाओं को और बड़ी प्यारी प्यारी मुस्कान दे रहा हो। तो ऐसी सोच जब हम फिल्मों में लेके आएंगे, जब हम, गौरी जी ने जैसे कहा, वो एक बहुत खूबसूरत डांसर, उन्होंने अभी कथक या जो भी उसकी एक कला है, जो हमारी हिंदुस्तानी जड़ें हैं, जो हमारी संस्कृति से जुड़ी हैं, जब आप उससे जुड़ के ऑस्ट्रेलिया से जुड़ेंगे तो देखिए दोनों का कल्चर आपको एक जैसा ही नजर आएगा। क्योंकि वो जो क्रिएटर है ना, जिसने इस रचना को रचा है, उसने कोई ऑस्ट्रेलियन नहीं बनाया, कोई हिंदुस्तानी नहीं बनाया, कोई पाकिस्तानी नहीं, उसने रचना रची। जहां जहां जैसे जैसे जिसका जन्म होता है वो उसको अडॉप्ट करता है। हमारे हाथ में नहीं है हम किस धर्म को अडॉप्ट करें। जन्म के वक्त हमारा जन्म हमारे हाथ में नहीं होता। हम हिंदू के घर पैदा होते हैं तो हिंदू होते हैं, हम सिख के घर पैदा होते हैं तो सिख होते हैं, इंडिया में पैदा होते हैं तो इंडियन हो जाते हैं। सो अगर हमारा जब बेसिक सोल मिलता है और वो फिल्मों में अगर दिखाई दे जाए, तो इससे बढ़िया इस मकसद, इस सिनेमा का जो आज आपका ये जो पैनल बैठा है, मुझे नहीं लगता कुछ हो सकता है कि हम सोल से सोल मिला दें, ताल से ताल मिला, हमने सुना है, हम चलिए सोल से सोल मिलाते हैं, वो कहानियां लाते हैं, वो करेक्टर लाते हैं उनका। हमें ऑस्ट्रेलिया क्या दिखता है, अगर हम यहाँ, मैं अपने यहाँ से बैठ के देखता हूँ, अरे यार बहुत खूबसूरत है, घूमने का मजा आएगा, वाह क्या समुंदर है, क्या नदी है, क्या पुल है, क्या फ्लावर्स है। नहीं, कभी उनके गाँव में हमने जाके नहीं देखा, कभी उनकी जड़ों में जाके उनकी प्रॉब्लम्स या उनकी गरीबी और अमीरी को हमने महसूस नहीं किया, जो विक्रांत जी ने शायद किया है, जो जो वहां है वो कर रहे हैं। तो इसलिए उन्हीं के मन में ख्याल आता है कि इंडो ऑस्ट्रेलिया कैसे मिक्स किया जाए। ये बहुत बढ़िया एक सेशन है, बहुत बढ़िया ये प्रयास है, और मैं चाहूंगा अगर मेरी कोई हेल्प किसी को भी चाहिए तो मैं बिल्कुल 24 घंटे वहां पे मौजूद हूँ। और हमें सभी को चाहिए, ना केवल हमें जी। इंडियन सिनेमा की अगर हम बात करते हैं तो बहुत सारे, हम विदेश को शुरू से, मैं बार बार उस पर आता हूँ कि अगर राज कपूर की बात करें, अराउंड द वर्ल्ड इन $7 एक उनकी फिल्म, अराउंड द वर्ल्ड एक फिल्म थी जी, तो जी। पूरे उन्होंने वर्ल्ड को, तब हम भाई टूरिस्ट की दृष्टि से ही देख रहे हैं।
Thank you, Dr. Mankkar. You gave a completely new dimension, like you talked about soul making. This is really important, and also you in a way continue to the discussion which was already there, which Gauri also pointed out, that the culture is rooted to your traditions and customs, and that's really the creativity. And you even went to the extent saying that culture has no boundaries, culture has no nationalities, culture has no religion. It all depends as to how, I mean, where you are living and how you are into that land and how the things are developing. And so you become part of that, and then in due course of time, that develops as a culture. You talked about the thinking, and then obviously you gave more importance to the mindset of the people, to the thinking process of the people, rather than on technology and technicalities and the shooting facilities and all. And another important point which you raised, which is really important in today's time for all of us to understand, the importance of content. So in India also, this is changing, particularly after this OTT, and more particularly after this Corona has happened. The utmost focus nowadays is on the content. The films are based on the content, the web series are based on the content. So content is, in any case, as we call it, the king, not as to where we are shooting, how we are shooting, what equipments we are using and all. And this aspect is also well taken, that you talked about the collaboration, more collaborative approach between India and Australia, particularly if we want to grow further into the area of filmmaking and gelling these cultures, if we are talking about the cross-cultural things. So moving on to finally, because this whole idea came for having this session from Dr. Vikrant Kishore. So now he is supposed to finally sum up this whole discussion in a manner, because he is the best person to understand this whole debate on cross-cultural creativity from various respects, which has already been pointed out. One, that he was born and brought up in India, and then he has been living in Australia for so long, pursuing his career, also pursuing his passion of filmmaking. So he is a unique blend of a film academic and filmmaker, and he has his understanding of Indian culture, the Australian culture, and he is working in that area on the academic background, on the ground also. So we would like to listen to you, Dr. Vikrant Kishore, on this.
Thanks, Professor Amrish. And it was such a fantastic kind of a panel today, and diverse kind of views, and Phil very well set up that scene of putting creativity in the context, and then Susan, through her particular approach to creativity and her a kind of an easy analysis of how she puts the field, domain, and the agent in the picture, and how we should start thinking around those. And Anjali put in the perspective of how the Indian creativity is also becoming much more international. They are also in the same field of looking internationally and working in the same way. Earlier, there used to be always a kind of a critical or people would complain about Indian filmmaking standards not up to Hollywood. Now, the standards are more or less the same. But of course, I'll come on to the difference of the storytelling aspect. That's what makes us different, Hollywood and Indian cinema, why it is different, the creativity aspect there. And then Gauri very well weaved in the whole story of, traditional art forms and performing arts, and how as a creative practitioners, we have a different sense of an understanding and working. And this is probably defines the difference between the Indian way of Indian creativity system and Western creativity system. And two things which Gauri put forth was about the Guru Shishya Parampara, or the teacher-student relationship, which is like very much embedded in the culture of India. And teachers are gurus, and teachers are almost worshipped. And till date, whenever I go back to India, it's always a pleasure to go back into classroom. Whereas in Australia, anybody can walk in and anybody can walk out any time of your lectures if they are bored, or if they don't want, or if they want to have a coffee or a loo break or whatever. It's democracy and whatever you call it, it's in practice. But where in India, I still see the classroom situation, it's more about respecting the teacher and their time. And that's what I find very interesting and important as well. And traditional culture has upheld that kind of thing. And that creativity, it's not just about, lots of creativity is inborn, but then how the teacher owns that kind of aspect, that also becomes very important. And the aspect of agency, how much agency the teacher has in molding that, it's a bit different from the Western perspective, where the individualistic or individuality actually, takes over. Whereas in the Indian perspective, the teacher-student relationship plus the communal involvement, the community, and the duty towards people. So in India also, another aspect is that before you exercise your right, you should understand your duty. So the duty around people that you have, and how you're responding to those things, the duty towards your not only towards your family, towards the community, but also to the things that, to your art form. What is your duty towards your art form? So when you are a script writer and how you're writing things, what you have to do, what is your duty towards bringing out in the script, is not just about going into a specific mode, but also understanding those perspectives. So there are so many things, but what I see, and I'll just go back into the Australia-India relations, and that has been a kind of a challenge for Indians trying to explore those opportunities here in Australia. And there are, we might find those kind of examples, or they have been able to get some success in Australian media, but that's very handful. You can just count those people, and then you can say that that's what is happening. But another thing, what has happened, that the entrepreneurial kind of ability of a whole lot of people who are creative, who want to make film, that in last 7-8 years in Australia, we are seeing, Melbourne-based Indian films gaining ground, Sydney-based Indian films gaining ground. And there are these local productions and people who are trying to make their own films because they are not getting enough opportunities in the Australian media. And that's where those kind of challenge comes. And Anjali also mentioned earlier about those kind of co-production deals and all those kind of issues. And, Australia, the last time the co-production and all those kind of, a proper framework was put in 2008. And after that, there has been no kind of, any kind of movement in that. Only about 2 years back, the Melbourne, the Victorian Premier announced a $3 million grant for Indian production houses to come and film in Australia. But then it is not as lucrative as the way $3 million seems like, or for a general person, because it's a very small pot of money. And that too, you have to also work through lots of kind of loops, lots of kinds of issues, like you have to have more than 50% of local people employed. Then people, Indian producers, for them, they have to see where they can, and then the Australian dollars value is also high, and also the pay rates are very high compared to lots of other European countries. So these are the kind of, situations. Anjali, you wanted to add something there?
Yeah, I do actually. I want to just say that today you can make a film on a mobile, right? So it's more about storytelling. Unfortunately, one way of looking at it is that, okay, when we're talking about cross-cultural and creativity in cross-cultural, so I think what's also important to highlight here, Vikrant, is that the people who, like today, if I want to sit here and make a film on the Aboriginal didgeridoo, okay, and the Aboriginal communities, I can't go anywhere else. I'll have to make it there only. So a lot of times an outside person has a better perspective on your culture than you do, which is why a Slumdog Millionaire is made by a Britisher and it has done very well in America. It's a very interesting study. So today, if I want to make a film with an Australian character in Australia, I can have a co-pro. I have experienced that in Cannes, and we have very good co-producers in Australia. But when I go there, will I qualify as an Australian film or an Indian film? Or will that film then run in India or will it not? These are little things. And when you say cross-cultural, then also, there was a whole spate of crossover films from India that had happened, which were mostly American-Indian crossover films. They never did well. Why? You see, it's a very interesting study. Somebody has to talk about that in this panel.
That's what I was coming, that India-centric films, okay, not Indian films. Indian films hardly get accepted by the wider audience, Australian
because
audience.
Of the narrative. But, is what the narrative structures.
But India-centric films, if you'll see, such as Lion or Hotel Mumbai, or Un-Indian or The Run. Now, these are the films made by Australians, but with a focus on India. Now, they get accepted. They are more palatable because the story structure, the narrative style is more Western. And for anyone to go to theater,
it's a global film. It's not a specific, because Indian narrative, like, the lady here just explained to us, there are these rases, the Nav rases, right? Then there is the Indian film structure is totally different. It's a 5-act. It's not a 3-act. And we have an interval point in the middle. And the whole thing is designed for a different kind of palette. If I'm talking about Bollywood or mainstream, any regional film also, it's technically Bollywood. if you start to make a film the way it is to be made, or way it holds attention in a 1 hour or lesser, 90 minutes or lesser, then that kind of thing doesn't apply for an Indian audience, because the Indian audience is used to a very different narrative. We have those 5 songs, in a Western film, I can't put them unless it's a musical like La La Land.
Yeah. And La La Land again becomes a success because it's a musical. Okay. And
Right.
even if in that structure, Indian structure films, because there is also a stereotype image about Indian cinema.
Exactly.
So people don't want to even watch that kind of film. And that's
because
why
of the circus, it's a circus. You'll watch it once a year. You won't watch it all the time. So it's also a cultural way of viewing. So one has to be just aware of that when one is structuring content. But I'm saying all that exists, but you can still make any film you want to make. It always finds its audience as long as there's integrity and intention.
Yep. And but if I look at in terms of Australia at the moment, there will be always people watching films, but that shouldn't be creating a kind of a pressure on Indian filmmakers to go Western, like removing, like now there is a concentrated kind of a thing of, okay, let's move song and dance from films. Let's just keep it at the end and all. And I'm missing my song and dance from Bollywood films. I want it, stop catering to just the Westerners, but there is also room for that. But again, if we start making Indian films more like Hollywood, more like a Western storytelling, then we lose our own kind of creativity, which again, Gauri brought about the traditional storytelling and the traditional style of, thinking and all those things. And that's where I question. Definitely OTT has given a huge kind of a, boost to Indian cinema and the kind of different kind of storytelling, like South Indian cinema. Now, I love South Indian cinema and the kind of really, really intense films that they make. Earlier, I wouldn't have gone to a theater to watch it, but now I'm watching it. Similarly, the Western audience is also opening up to Indian content through that. And in fact, I saw a thread going on in one of the Australian Facebook Netflix page, and they were going after Netflix. Why are you putting so much of Indian content? Every time I open, there are 10 Indian content. And they were like really abusive in their thing that they did not want to see any Indian content out there. But yet Netflix.
I have to tell them, you please give them a message out that they have gone and clicked on something in Netflix which says Indian content, and that is why it's pushing Indian content onto them, because that's the algorithm it follows. It has nothing to do with Netflix.
Well, online media is a crazy place, so I never pay attention. But these are the threads that you see, and then you can just chuckle on it and just push them aside. You don't pay too much of attention. But then people get bothered by that too much of Indian content, but they don't think about India is the largest producer of films. So if Netflix is the biggest aggregator, it will go on to that. And then on top of that, if we look at the box office, India has less than 2% population in Australia. Yet in last 4 to 6 years, I think last 6 years, every year in top 10 box office of Australia, 2 to 3 Bollywood films are featuring in there. They are still making a huge amount of money driven by the Indian audience, which is less than 2%. So that makes about who is going to the theater. Okay. And when I say Indian films, it includes Punjabi films, it includes Tamil films, it includes Hindi films. And that's what is happening. And it's a kind of, and then I was talking to yesterday, we had the distributor from Z Studios, Achala, and she came and she talked about that, how even small towns like Dubbo in I think in Victoria or NSW, that they were asking for Bollywood films to be released in those places, which are typically
Wow. I mean, I'm very happy to hear it as a content head of a studio.
So about 4 months back, they had a drive-in screening Radhe, full of Caucasians enjoying Radhe, Salman Khan's, over the top film. But then that happened, and that is happening. And earlier when I came in 2006, where, only 10 theaters would screen Hindi films, today any big film would release in at least 70 to 80 theaters in Australia. So it is changing dramatically. The dramatic change is also coming through the Indian diaspora and their need to connect with their own films and their own culture. But it is also driving a whole lot of change in terms of engagement with the Indian media, and it's going to change. So
Really
anyway,
helps
I
to
know I'm
know
running
your
out of
story.
time, so I'll just stop it here. I think it's a very interesting thing, and we should have a longer panel someday else and take more of your inputs on this.
Yeah, I mean, we need much longer time to discuss such kind of issues. But since we are running out of time, thank you, Dr. Vikrant Kishore, for emphasizing on the storytelling aspect. And as you said, that the narrative is more important, and then we should try to maintain our roots, the culture, whenever we are trying to create a story, to tell a story by making a film. And which was also endorsed in a big way by Anjali Bhushan. So moving on, since this panel is supposed to be an interactive session wherein we are taking questions from the students, from the audience. So I will request Dr. Manasi Maheshwari to please ask these questions on behalf of the student, the questions which she would have received.
Yes, sir. There are a couple of questions, so I'll take the first one. This says, how far do you feel transnational creativity adding to the fan culture amongst the youth, especially amongst the youth? So anyone in the panel can...
I think Vikrant has done studies on celebrity culture and all. Yeah, Professor Phillip, yeah, please.
Just from my own anecdotal experience, and this is really quite circular, and really it's a diasporic experience, and it's an intercultural experience as well. But this evening I have to do a podcast that's run out of Los Angeles on George Harrison, and luckily for me, as a youth, George actually introduced me to Indian culture, not personally, of course, but through his music. And about 3 weeks ago, my youngest son started playing me back some of that music. He's a musician himself as well. It's a family situation. So there is a lot of correspondence I can see in my own family experience between cultures that have been rooted in particular locations that have now simply gone global. And I don't think my youngest son, Benny, considers that he's engaging with Indian culture per se. To him, it's his culture. He understands music in a particular way. And, this is so naturalized to him, he probably wouldn't even think about it. But I can hear in his own music that he's recording, the things that come out of Indian culture and the things that come out of Celtic culture. And it's just there as an amalgamation. It is just the way he performs music. So anecdotally, I can give you some idea from a youthful perspective, but of course I'm no longer youthful.
You're always youthful, as long as you want to be youthful.
Yes,
true. So, this morning I had a conversation with my daughter, and it's very interesting. She's talking to me about this Taylor Swift song, which is 10 minutes long, about a song which she wrote when she was 20, and which is right now top of the charts, even on Spotify and everywhere else. And I heard it, and I actually cried listening to it. I felt like, oh, is she talking about what I went through? It is, because it is about what you go through, what you emotionally attach in your head as a memory, and when it plays back to you in a film or a art piece of any form, or music, of course, and is the most close to human experience, and which is why it's more an exact and godly form. But there's no comparison, of course, to any art. It's all good. But you go through different things. Like I remember seeing an Australian movie when I was a kid called it's a very, very famous film. I think I've seen it some 3-4 times on Indian TV in Doordarshan. It's about a little girl who vanishes from a school. It's a black and white film. And they go up on an excursion, and then
The Picnic at Hanging Garden.
Picnic at Hanging Rock. She doesn't come back. Now that film, to me as a child, meant one thing, as a student of literature meant one thing, and as a student of film meant one thing, and as a mother meant one thing. And today I'm looking back at it, means one thing for me. At every stage in life, as a woman, it resounds in my head as a reference point. So how did an Australian film about an Australian girl from a boarding school make such a big impact? And those were the days when we weren't seeing so much English language content in India. But this one film really stood out, and there were, of course, others and whatever. But Australian film, when somebody says to me, I'm immediately thinking of that film. And of course, there's so many more.
Yes.
So,
sorry, Anjali, I was just gonna interject and say, well, you said it earlier, that emotions are global. And I think emotions are not just global, they're also intergenerational as well.
Absolutely.
And as we grow older, your experiences, as you cited a moment ago, just about, as a mother and as a woman and so on, we experience the same films in very different ways as we move through the generations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on, Dr. Manasi.
I just wanted to add one very little point to this transnational creativity, which is the consumption of Korean content by Indian youth. And that is creating a new paradigm to the references to cultural codes in India. And it is surprising how even the language codes have come into action, and people who are peers in that domain talk to each other in a new language, which is non-comprehensible to people who may not be part of the Korean drama, space. So I think
I second it, because my daughter watches Korean pop and Korean drama so much, that K-pop as it's called, that sometimes I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you don't know BTS? Or go check BTS. And then you go Google it, and there are these little boys jumping up and down in synchronized movements, and that's the most palatable music videos going around in the country. So you're absolutely right. And Korean films have made, and Korean soap operas, they make such a resounding effect on Indian audience, especially the youngsters, because they're very simply told stories, and it's all emotional. A lot of music, less dialogue. So you get it even without a translation or a subtitle. You get it.
विक्रांत जी, एक छोटा सा सवाल मेरी तरफ से है. अगर एनिमेशन की बात करें तो जैसे मोटू पतलू हिंदुस्तान में और बाकी देशों में भी है, ऑस्ट्रेलिया में उसका क्या स्वरूप है? क्या वहाँ लोग देखते हैं मेरे मोटू पतलू को या नहीं?
Indians, definitely, they watch it. So just for Susan and Phil, Harvinder is the creator of a very successful animation character called Motu Patlu. In fact, when I was a kid, I used to read those comic books, and till date, kids really like it. And now it has been turned into an animation series. So he's asking if people in Australia watch it. Indians, definitely, they watch it. Australians, generally, they keep away from Indian content. It's getting better, but generally, yeah, I would say it's a difficult thing. They are too busy with American content. Sorry. Yeah,
thank you, panel. With this, you have already answered 2 more questions, which were about cross-cultural creative process and all. So there's one last one for the Vikrant sir. As you said, on Netflix, people are not liking too much of Indian content, and we make movies for audience. Then why are we not changing our ways? Why are we not trying to make something different? So that comes from Khushi Srivastava.
I didn't say it was Netflix people. It was on a Netflix movies page where there were lots of people having a conversation. And generally, you don't pay attention to too many these kind of discussions, because there will be thousands of those kind of discussions, people fighting for their country or their culture or things like that. And why should you change your own storytelling style? You can experiment with it, but I don't think, I still love my song and dance. When it comes to commercial films, I want my song and dance, as simple as that. I still want my, Amitabh Bachchan or Salman Khan acting what they are, superheroes for me. I don't have to watch a Marvel film to watch a superhero. They can do it very well for me. So
I want to take this a little bit, because, it's not that you need to change culture. There are different kinds of storytelling within the Indian system also. So if you read books like Katha, and and if you look at Shyam Benegal films, or you look at what's been happening, even Guru Dutt films, some of them, and it's not about just song and dance, it's the story narrative style. So the big ticket cinema, as we call it, which are the Spider-Man and the Marvel movies, etc., or the animation films that Pixar does, those are also pan-cultural, because the emotions stay the same. So those will always do well, because it's a spectacle. Everybody wants to see a spectacle. Na circus dekhne jana hai. That's great. But there is also different kind of storytelling that is happening, which we easily see incorporated in the Indian culture as well.
I would like
Ishika?
to invite Professor Dr. Susmita Bala, Head DME Media School and Festival Associate Director, to give her concluding remarks.
Thank you, Ishika. Thank you, panelists. It was a wonderful session, interesting and lively. I enjoyed a lot. We listened a different point of view, your perspective on cross-culture creativity. This was very interesting session. The important aspect which this panel has enlightened us was very by locating the film industry within the creative and culture industry sector, which is global in nature. Culture and tradition is always close to everyone. Culture is rich in every country, either Australia or India. Professor Phillip highlighted how different cultures express creativity and art in a different manner and evolve from the experience of not just the individual, but the journey of the community as well. Ms. Susan explained the various models, literatures on how to approach this through the cultural economical view. Dr. Gauri highlighted how traditional and folk culture are blended in the films. She always touches upon unique aspects and makes session interesting. डॉक्टर हरविंदर जी ने जिस तरह से अपनी बात को रखा बहुत अपीलिंग लगा और बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग लगा क्योंकि हम इंडियन और ऑस्ट्रेलिया कल्चर की फिल्मों की ट्रेडिशंस की बात कर रहे हैं तो हमें सारे एस्पेक्ट्स देखने पड़ते हैं और हमें म्यूजिक आर्ट और जिन चीज़ों की भी हम बात कर रहे हैं बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग और अपीलिंग है जिस तरह का गौरी मैम ने एक छोटा सा वीडियो दिखाया दैट वाज वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. This panel discussion comes at a view where transitional cross-cultural creativity, collaboration and consumption has happened. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to Vikrant, Kishore for bringing such as interesting panel for us. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I believe this student have had very fruitful insights for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your kind words. I thank all our panelists for enlightening session. Thank you so much. I would like to extend my immense gratitude to the management of DME. Without the support of Mr. Aman Sahani, Vice Chairman, DME, Honorable Justice Bhavar Singh, Director General DME, and Dr. Ravikant Swami, Director DME, we would not have been able to come this far. I also thank them for giving us this wonderful opportunity and the resources to execute the same. I am thankful to Dr. Amresh Saxena, Dean DME Media School and Festival Director CIFFI, and Dr. Vikrant Kishore, Festival Director, Dr. Susmita Bala, Head DME Media School and Festival Associate Director, for the constant support and guidance and encouragement at every step. I thank all our partners for collaborating with our efforts. My gratitude also goes to the student body of DME Media School Spark, that is, students with positive attitude and resonating communication. A special note of thanks to Ms. Mclntyre, Ms. Shruti VS, Ms. Mudita Raj, Dr. Manasvi Maheshwari, Dr. Teenam Bora, Ms. Sukriti Arora for their efforts and constant support and cooperation. I thank Dr. Krishna Pandey, Mr. Pramod Pandey, and Mr. Mohammad Kamil for the media coverage, Mr. Sachin Nair, Mr. Sumantra Das, Mr. Yogesh Sharma, and Mr. Vishal Sahai for managing the technical production and digital operations, Mr. Amol Mehta for designing, and Mr. Abhishek Yadav for IT support. I would also like to thank the student team of CIFFI, who worked tirelessly, facing all the challenges and obstacles of the pandemic to make this festival happen. I must thank all our participants who have contributed the creative pieces for this festival. Lastly, thanks to our audience for joining the session. We will be soon back with another set of experts who will deliberate on the topic Australian Indians in Australian Media, Challenges and Opportunities. The session will commence soon.